Welcome, friends, to Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So we're moving right along here in the book of Matthew, friends. It's slow but sure, and we're working our way through the entire book. That's the plan. Today, we're picking it up in chapter 14, verse 13, and we're going to start looking at some of the miraculous elements of Jesus' life and ministry. And they're well-known, well-read, but fascinating and absolutely inspiring. So right after this break, we'll get to it.
The work of the Word of God is stunningly remarkable. We must understand that God has placed His life codes of salvation and healing in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jim Cantelon is focused on the messages that God has communicated through the Bible to you and me. Today, it's more important for us now that we learn what God is saying to us. God has placed us here now to be examples and to share the good news of His work with the world today. If you've heard the divine mind speak to you through this program, then God has worked in amazing ways to reveal His Word. Remember that this program has cost, and we have been faithful to God to bring this program to you. If you want to give an offering in any amount, we would appreciate it. Send to Jim Cantelon Today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. Or call us at 519-415-8341. Or simply visit jimcantelontoday.com.
So Jesus, I'm sure, in mourning because of the beheading of John the Baptist, his favorite cousin, retreats and tries to find a little place just to grieve alone. The crowds hear that he's in this secret place or in that region, and they walk around the lake, even though he'd gone across the lake by boat. They walk around the lake trying to find him, following him, looking for more of his miraculous power. You know, when you read this, you try to put yourself in Jesus' shoes. His life was a constant pressure in terms of the needs of the people. Yes, he had a heart for them. Yes, he had compassion. Again and again, you see that he's moved with compassion. But the point is, he was not only God, he was also man. And he had taken on flesh, dwelling among us, full of grace and truth, as the scripture says. He had basically yielded the independent exercise of his godlike attributes, as Philippians 2 tells us. He needed to eat. He needed to sleep. He was human. And the constant stress, the constant demands of the people, I'm sure at times were enough to break most people. From time to time, he's doing things and the disciples are not necessarily in the picture at all. They may have been back, with their families doing some fishing. They weren't constantly together all of the time. And so a lot of his life was a solitary life, and he needed a break. Anyway, he reaches out of his solitude and his exhaustion and ministers to people so effectively. So here in 14, we pick it up, verse 14. When Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them, healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. This deserted place, we don't know where it was. It had to be somewhere, on the boundary of the lake, and probably in the northern boundary of the lake. I think it may have been in the northeastern corner of the lake, just beyond Bethsaida. There was a whole vacant area there that sloped up to what we now know as the Golan Heights. And it was very isolated then and very isolated now. In fact, I was just in that area when I was taping another television program, and it's absolutely deserted. It's bleak, an ideal place for a guy to get away by himself. Climb up the hill halfway maybe, sit down under the shade of a thorn tree and look down at the beautiful Sea of Galilee below you and enjoy the view and take a few deep breaths. Anyway, we don't know where it was. People found him. And we're talking a lot of people here. We're talking 5,000 men plus women and children. So for all we know, it may have been a total of maybe 7,500 people, maybe more. It's getting late in the day. Bethsaida would be maybe 2 miles away. Capernaum about 3.5 to 4 miles away. Tiberias, a long way around the lake, on the other side of the lake, long walk. And Jesus looks on them with compassion, we read in verse 14. He was moved with compassion for them. Now, let me just pause there for a minute. When you study the life of Jesus and his miraculous ministry, he would walk by 100 pathetic people for every one that he healed. And you could say, well, what's up with that? Shouldn't he have been healing every one that he saw? Well, for one thing, it was mathematically impossible. If he had tried to heal every one that he saw, he never would have got outside of Capernaum. He had a vast ministry, an extensive reach to his ministry. What you read when he heals people, when he delivers people, when he does something miraculous in someone's life, again and again you read, and moved with compassion, he. I may comment on that a little later in the show, but I just wanted to point that out, that the compassion was the trigger, if you will, for his healing ministry. He healed their sick, okay? So it's evening. He's saying, this place is deserted, it's late. And the disciples say, well, let's, let them go and let them find some food. In Bethsaida, for instance. Jesus said, no, they don't go do that. Have them sit down, How much food you got, guys? How much food? We find elsewhere in the gospel, as this story is recounted, that it was a little guy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. A lunch his mother had packed for him. We have that, the disciples say, I'm sure, with a kind of a sarcastic tone. Okay, bring it to me. What happens? He tells people to sit down in the grass. Now, sitting down in the grass, that's something you can only do in the springtime. Latter half of March, first 2 weeks of April, and then the sun comes out and just beats the daylights out of the grass and it becomes straw. So I'm assuming this might have been a springtime story. Don't quote me on it, but I think that's probably what it was. He takes the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, looks to heaven, blesses, breaks the bread, gives the loaves to the disciples. The disciples give the multitude, and guess what? Everybody gets enough to eat. 5 loaves and 2 fish is not enough for a big man to eat. these loaves would be small. They'd be like little pita bread, okay? The Bible says, despise not the day of small beginnings. This was definitely a small beginning. This was, like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds. You plant it in the earth, becomes one of the biggest bushes. That's from another parable that Jesus tells. This is the 1 talent, if you will. And here in this case, you have a 1 talent little boy, a lunch provided by a concerned, efficient mother. And interestingly, it's the only miracle that's recorded in all 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only one. It's an amazing story. And it demonstrated Jesus' sovereignty over nature, and it was a creative act. It was supernatural in character, and it leads in John's account to Jesus' dissertation on, I am the bread of life. And I was watching a documentary on the Great Depression recently, and some of the people who were so severely affected by the Great Depression in the U.S. talked about how they just needed a little bread. If we just had some bread, we think we can make it. And throughout history, when you get right down to it, what we all need is some bread. We don't necessarily need to have a steak. We don't necessarily need to have, a gourmet, well-balanced meal. We just need some bread. Bread seems to be, as they say, the staff of life. Well, this is all these people needed: a little bread, a little protein with the fish. And Jesus says, I'm the bread of life. The food that was left over, Matthew tells us, filled 12 baskets. You say, well, 12 baskets? Who had 12 baskets? Why would there be 12 baskets? There's a lot of discussion about that on the part of Bible commentators, but one of them, and I think it's fairly credible, suggests that when the disciples were out on the road, they carried like backpacks with them, only probably with a strap, and on their side it would be made out of reeds, some kind of a weaving material. And in those baskets, they would carry maybe a change of clothes, maybe a bite to eat, just whatever. Someone suggested, well, that's what was being filled here. The 12 baskets full because there's 12 disciples. I don't know. But the point is, friends, there was surplus. Jesus not only gives what we need, he gives us more than we need. Fascinating, huh? So, I'll leave that and let's move on. Okay? I'm always moving the wrong way here. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. Now, this would be nighttime. It was already getting late when they fed the 5,000. By the time that's all done, it's dark. Everybody is dispersing, and Jesus, I think, is quite happy for the cover of darkness. He's able to find himself alone again, and he sends the multitudes away. All right? And when he had sent them away, we read, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, I mentioned to you that I think this may have been the northeastern area of the Sea of Galilee, big steep slope that goes up to what we now call the Golan Heights, actually higher than the Mount of Beatitudes, which rises above Capernaum, which is just a few miles to the west. Evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now, in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It's a ghost." They cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid." Jesus, I think in the King James Version, it says, constrained the disciples to get into the boat. This suggests that he was, okay, guys, okay, come on, let's move on here, move on. He's just sent the people away. Get to the boat, come on, let's get out of here. He constrains them, all right? To escape. And Jesus had to escape once in a while. He needed to get away from these demanding people. Because mainly, as John suggests, after seeing this remarkable nature miracle where he multiplied the loaves and fish, they want to make him the king by force. They want to take him, if they have to, by force, transport him to Jerusalem, and establish the throne right there, right now. And there's no way that Jesus was ready for that. He knew his time wasn't yet. And besides, as he will say, they wanted another free meal. Let's keep him around. It's kind of like having a mobile McDonald's with us. Whenever we want a hamburger, just call on Jesus, he'll give it to you. From this moment, you see a bit of a shift in Jesus' ministry. Apart from this time alone, you see him focusing his teaching more on his disciples. You see him withdrawing to pray. You see him withdrawing from the crowds. You see him withdrawing from the Jewish law. He needs to build something into his disciples that will be spiritually sustainable, because already Jesus knows that his time is short. And there's something you got to say about rest here. You know, God instituted rest, 1 day in 7, this Shabbat or Sabbath, rest. There's been a lot of legalistic interpretation of Sabbath. I grew up with a very legalistic interpretation of Sabbath. All Sabbath is taking a breather. The Lord is merciful. He sees us working like crazy, and especially in that time and era, working 12-hour days for a pittance, child labor, all kinds of slave labor. At least 1 day a week, even in the life of the slave and the child laborers, there should be a day when they do nothing but sit in the shade of a tree, eat some fruit, drink some water, and totally relax. Play some games, sleep, whatever. Anything but work. The rabbis took it, of course, made it into a legalistic system. This is one of the things that they were constantly at odds with Jesus about, because he just simply refused to endorse this legalistic view of Sabbath. But the point is this: rest is creative. Rest is not stagnating. Rest actually provides your brain, let alone your spirit, time to regroup and re-energize and recharge. That's why we call it recreation. Recreation, right? Recreation. That's what Sabbath is all about. As long as it's not work, relax and be renewed. Jesus practiced what he preached. This is what he believed. And we see him basically demonstrating this in his ability to push the crowd away, push his disciples out on the lake, and just go back into the quiet place just for a few hours for some rest. But then something miraculous happened.
Remote and rural, these children and their families have no access to medical care. There is no clinic nearby. And when a mother is desperate to save her dying child, she will walk for many hours. Sometimes the child doesn't survive. So we go to them. These tables and chairs under the trees look like a gathering, not a medical clinic. But the doctors and nurses are transforming the lives of the children and their families. They provide primary medical care, classes on sanitation, medicines, and a better understanding of HIV and AIDS. Most of all, they bring hope as they diagnose, treat, and educate families. This clinic is a gift from donors that will transform their lives. You can become part of that transformation. Your gift of $25 will provide health care for an entire family. $100 provides care for 6 families. Be a part of real change. Go to wowmission.ca/saveachild.
So Jesus is up on the mountain, up on the Golan Heights, in the dark. Jesus used to sleep, but he often would go throughout the night, it seems, just with him and his Father in discussion. It's the 4th watch of the night, verse 25 of Matthew 14. The boat is way out in the middle of the lake, and Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It's a ghost." They cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased, and those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." John in his gospel tells us the boat was about 3 or 4 miles from Tabgha, we think, which is on the other side of Bethsaida, about 3/4 of the way across the lake from the eastern side. They were out on the boat alone. It was a middle of the night sail. They obviously knew the lake well and knew where they were going. Mind you, the lake is so small. I think even I could find my way. I mean, it's only, I think, 12 kilometers long and 6 kilometers wide. It's just, by Canadian standards, it's a puddle. Anyway, suddenly they see this apparition on the water. And that's exactly what they thought it was, an apparition, a ghost, some kind of a spirit, in human form that's walking on the water. Theologians have been intrigued with this story. And one of the questions that they often address is the question of, well, this was Jesus, but what were they seeing? Were they seeing the flesh and blood Jesus, or were they seeing the transfigured Jesus that Peter, James, and John saw on the Mount of Transfiguration, a kind of a spiritualized Jesus? Well, it seems to me that what you have here is the physical Jesus, who demonstrates not just his power over nature vis-a-vis turning fish and loaves into enough food to fill the stomachs of maybe 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 people, if you include the women and the children. But he has that ability to deal with nature itself, with wind and waves, and even with gravity. This power was not something he demonstrated in a blatant show-offy fashion. I think if you and I had had his power, we might have been tempted to, show it off once in a while and to use it to our own advantage. Not Jesus. But he chooses to come out to meet the boat before the boat meets the land. And he's walking on the water. The disciples, of course, are spooked. They think it's a ghost, a spirit. Mark tells us in Mark chapter 6 that the disciples, quote, reflected not on the waves, for their heart was hardened. Which is a fascinating observation. I mean, just a few hours ago, they'd seen Jesus feed thousands of people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. How in the world, in just that short period of time, would their hearts be hardened? But again, it's a reflection on human nature and the fact that, when people say, just show me a sign, just show me a miracle, and I'll believe. Not true. The Lord can show you 20 miracles, and next week you'll have forgotten them, or act as though they never happened. That's the nature of the human spirit. So, Jesus is on the water. And Peter, impulsive Peter, puts 2 and 2 together and says, that's really Jesus. If he's walking on the water, then I can walk on the water. And he does, briefly. But then he gets his eyes off Jesus and onto the waves, and he goes down. Many times when I'm reading this, I think of a law of motorcycling. My wife and I are both motorcyclists, have been for decades. Love motorcycling. But a motorcyclist knows this little adage. Look down, go down. Look up, stay up. On a motorcycle, if you look down, you're going to fall over. You cannot have your eyes on your front wheel and the road that it's covering. because you're going to get into trouble almost immediately. In order to be stable as a motorcycle rider, you got to keep your eye on the horizon. You got to be looking up. Same principle here. If Peter had kept his eyes on Jesus, he probably would have made it across the water to Jesus. The two of them would have walked back to the boat. Instead, he takes his eyes off Jesus and he looks down. He looks down, he goes down. Jesus rebukes him for his lack of faith, which surprises me because it seems to me he showed a lot of faith getting out of the boat, but his faith was short-lived. I think a lot of us can identify with it. I'll be back in a minute.
Very few African mothers ever see a doctor or midwife, yet each mother knows how fragile her child's life is. You see, 26,000 children under the age of 5 will die today because they don't have access to medical care. Your gift of $260, just $22 every month, helps stock a mobile clinic and train healthcare workers to care for young mothers and their children during pregnancy and preschool years. Join WOW Mother Care now. Protect the life of a mother and her child.
Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 2 is here. The focus of this book is Matthew chapters 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount, called the greatest sermon of all time. Gain background and insight into the Beatitudes, being salt and light, how to love your enemies, and the Lord's Prayer. We'd like you to have your copy of Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 2. If you're already a monthly partner, it will be sent out to you automatically in the next few weeks. If you would like to order Volume 2, you can do so by sending a gift in any amount. Call us at 519-415-8341 or write to Jim Cantelon today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7, or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 2 and it will be sent to you.
I'm getting some good feedback. It's taken a while, but it's finally coming, friends, from those of you who got Volume 1 of Cantelon's Casual Commentary. Well, Volume 2 is now out. It's twice the size of the first one. This one covers the entire Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And I really enjoyed writing it. It's a part of what will eventually be an entire book, which should be ready in about 6 months. But if you don't have a copy, get one. Call, phone, log on, do whatever you got to do. We'll be happy to send it to you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.